for that introduction. We're just getting the slides set up here. So what I'm going to speak about is a decade of lessons in open source licensing. I've been at the ASF for about 15 years now, and over that time I have reviewed 1,000 licenses. Now, when you see that number, you might think that's a bit of an exaggeration. It's actually not. I went and checked our mailing lists where everything is archived, and I have voted in over 1,000 releases. So, Ted's already introduced me. I'm also the VP of the Apache Incubator, and this is why I've been involved in so many releases, in that that's where I tend to review them. Yep. So, as I said, I've reviewed over 1,000 releases. And why is this important? Why does the ASF have this policy? So licensing matters, and it matters for a number of reasons. Most importantly, it's to avoid legal and reputational risks, both to yourself and the company that you work for, and the project that you're involved in as well. It also means that you have protection. So the ASF provides a legal umbrella to all of its contributors to its projects. So if something does happen, the ASF will protect you. And that's a very, very important thing, because you will not have that protection on a random GitHub repo or some other open source software. And I think that's one of the reasons why foundations like the ASF matter. So this is a short talk. It's only probably 25 minutes now. And so you're going to come away with a couple of things that I hope will be of value to you. So in reviewing a lot of releases over the years, I've found that there are some common misconceptions in open source software and licensing in particular. The first one I've got listed there is that all open source licenses are compatible with each other. And if you're a developer and you maybe don't know a lot about licensing, this is maybe something that you think, and that's not the case. I'll go into a little more detail on the next slide on that one. The next one there is, if it's on GitHub or Slack Overflow, can I use it? Well, I can use it. Well, the answer is probably not. You might be able to use it, but you might know. Does anyone here in the room know the policy on GitHub, on Slack Overflow code in ASF projects? No? It's not allowed. The licensing on Slack Overflow is not compatible with the Apache license. So in order to be able to take that code, you have to get permission from the author and get the code changed, or the license changed. So, and if something's on GitHub, it may be under an open source license, and you may be able to use it, but sometimes those licensing conditions are unclear. For example, it may say it's MIT license. So yeah, I can use that. That's compatible with the Apache license. Well, it might not be. Just because it says MIT on the cover, it may be that it has something else inside it that's, say, GPL license. And you may not see that immediately, but if you have a look through the code, you may discover that, and that's generally what happens in reviews. The other thing with licenses is that it's not just what you include in your source code. It's also what the licenses of the dependencies are. Because some licenses, such as the GPL license, have a strong copyleft nature, and just being dependent on them may be enough for that to take effect. So you need to look at the licenses of all your dependencies as well. And the other misconception that I often hear is that you can take some code, make a whole lot of changes to it, and because you've made all these changes to it, you can change the license. And that's usually not correct. There are a couple of licenses which allow that, but most of them don't. So it has to stay under the original license. So back to the first point that I had there. The ASF puts licenses into three categories: Category A, Category B, and Category X. And basically, Category A is everything is fine. You can include that in a source release. That's fine. Category B is conditional, and it generally means that you can only include it in a binary convenience release. And there are licenses like Eclipse and MPL. The Category A licenses are ones that you probably know quite well, like Apache, obviously, MIT, and BSD. And finally, there's Category X, which are things that are not allowed. And there's generally because they put conditions above and beyond what the Apache license allows. And they are licenses such as copyleft licenses like GPL, AGPL, and things like that. And also any non-OSI license. There's a couple of ways that you can actually put GPL code inside an Apache project, but it's usually if it's optional or if it's a build tool or something along those lines. And this matters because if you follow these categories and make your release comply with them and document everything that is in your release, this helps avoid legal friction with anyone who's using your release. And it also simplifies release reviews, and it also, gives trust in your project. And anyone who wants to use their software knows they can use it without legal risk. So in the 1,000+ releases that I've reviewed, there's a few other things that I've run into. Some of them are small and minor, and others are more serious. So probably the most common one is missing information from the license or notice file. So the license file is where you list all the licenses that are included in the source release, and that's all bundled third-party code. And often things are missing. There's just been a thorough IP analysis hasn't been done, and some third-party code's being missed. The second issue is including compiled code in the source release. At the ASF, we only release source code. So if you've got compiled code in there, then that's not a source release. Becoming more common is copy-pasted code from other places. And why this is coming more common, I think, is that there's a couple of reasons. For some reason, people have a blind spot around test assets. They think that you can just copy data and put it in your tests and consume it, but that's not the case. That has to also comply with the Apache license. So you can't take random things off random websites. Images are often an issue as well. I've on 4 occasions had to vote -1 on a release because it had a cat photo in it. So someone had taken a cat photo randomly off the internet. They hadn't used their own cat photo. In one case, it was actually a professional photographer's photo. So yeah, don't do that, please. The other issue is with they haven't looked through the entire dependency tree, and there's some undeclared or incompatible dependencies there. And the final one, these are the sort of the top 5 or 6 most common things, is that there's missing or modified license headers or copyrights. So, and most of these things are very easily fixed, but they take a little bit of work to get right. The other thing is that policy at the ASF has changed over time. It started off just being informal checks, and it's now a much more structured policy. There have also been recent changes, like adaptation of SPDX. So for people who don't know, SPDX is like a little license identifier that goes in a comment, usually in your header, and it gives a machine-readable way of identifying what license a file is under. And there's also recently been introduced software bill of materials. And what these do is they list out all the software that is contained within your release and what licenses it has. And again, that's machine-readable, so it's easy to have tooling around this to check that everything is okay. At, at Apache, there's also a tool called Apache Rat, which will test licenses, and a couple of projects have written their own tools as well to help with this. But we're starting to see more sophisticated things like Scan OSS, and what that will do is it actually look through all of your source code and check it with snippets of other bits of open source out on the internet and wherever, and it'll tell you if any code has been copied. I have recently, I was using this tool recently, and I found there was some code that was copied, and it turned out the developer hadn't actually copied it from the original source. They had used AI to generate the code, and the AI had generated the code verbatim, which is a concern. So at the ASF, particularly with incubating projects, we have mentors, and it's their role to help sort of surface these sort of issues early on. There are also industry shifts that have happened in recent time. Craig was mentioning this in his keynote this morning. There's the EU Cyber Resilience Act that has already passed and comes into full effect in December 27. There's also the US SBOM mandates that have come into effect. There's the EU AI Act as well. And all of these things impact on how we release software and what we need to check for and the procedures and policies that we have in place. So there are growing expectations from people who both use our software, i.e. vendors, and also governments. And they will actually impose things on us that we must do, otherwise we can face very large fines. And so it's got to the point where open source projects can't ignore compliance anymore. So it's mandatory that you do this, not just a nice optional extra. Then there's AI-generated code. I've touched on this briefly in that I mentioned finding some AI-generated code that had copied something of an incompatible license. But currently there's an unclear legal standing of AI-generated code. There's a lot of court cases that are going through in different jurisdictions. And it's actually, unfortunately, quite likely that there will be different rules and regulations in China, in Europe, and the US. And when we're something like the ASF, who has a global community working on a project, that can make things very difficult. It used to be, and this is advice from an actual lawyer, I'm certainly not a lawyer, that if you had generated AI code, the best practice was to label it as AI generated and treat it like a third-party contribution. So make sure that the end user is aware that it's generated. But unfortunately, because this industry has been changing so fast, we now have AI tools integrated into our IDEs, and it generates code for us all the time. So labeling it is really difficult. And I don't actually know what the solution to that is. Hopefully we can work something out in the next 6 months to a year to work around that. So the best practice that you can do at the moment is actually have some sort of project guidance around how you should use AI code and where you can use it, and you know, what disclaimers, if any, you need to put around it. As far as other advice goes around creating these releases, start reviewing your releases early, or start reviewing your licensing early. Don't just wait to when you're making a release, because it's likely you'll miss something and the release will take longer, or other issues will crop up. Start using SBOMs or some sort of license manifest. Doesn't have to be an SBOM. And automate checks where possible. So if you can check this stuff, you know, as part of your CI pipeline, then that's great. However, a word of caution, I have seen people try to automate all of this, and it's not actually possible. because, say, for example, you've got a mention of a GPL license in your code. Now, that could be absolutely fine. It could be a bit of code that is dual licensed under GPL and something else. It could be just a reference to the GPL license and not something that's actually under that license. So I have seen CI checks pass, and then when it's come to manual review, there's been issues with it. I think the other thing we can do is just educate contributors on our projects to be more aware of this, and you know, what are some of the standard things to do, like always use an ASF header, have some understanding of, you know, what the category A, category B, and category X licenses are, and you know, document how you make releases and what your licensing approach is to help people better understand that. So there's still some challenges for the future. SPDX adoption is still pretty uneven, particularly with older, less maintained software. There are certainly contribution education gaps. And while the ASF does have an AI policy on AI-generated code, it puts a lot of onus and responsibility on the contributor. And it hasn't been updated in a couple of years. And the AI has certainly moved on in a long way since then. So it's probably time that the ASF needs to revisit that. So I'm just going to wrap up, and then hopefully we've got some time for questions. Yay, we do. So licensing is basically everyone's responsibility. If you're contributing to a project, then you need to be aware of the basics, at least, of open source licensing. I would also, don't do this at release time. Do it all the time. Every time a bit of code gets checked in, make sure it's, you know, the correct license, and update your license and notice files as you go along. And that means you'll make faster releases when you come to making them. And those two things there, I think education is the key. Documenting these processes in your project and making that easily available to anyone who contributes to the project and the committers to your project will help. And also, we have lots of projects at the ASF, and lots of projects have run into all sorts of issues. So learn from others' mistakes and avoid doing the same thing in your project. So, you know, talk to other projects, find out what they've done and not done. Anyway, that's it from me. So thank you for coming along and listening to this talk, and I'll open up to questions.